I was talking to a parent this last week who had an interesting experience. His teenage son has a new girlfriend, and he and his wife wanted to get to know her. And so they're thinking, well, how can we get to know our teenage son's new girlfriend? They thought, well, let's invite her over. Then they thought, well, let's have a movie night. Yeah, we'll have a movie night and spend a whole evening together that way. And so the parents went out and they found a movie that they had a family friendly sound of the title, and they had seen it years before, but they couldn't really remember it, and the teens hadn't seen it before. So the big evening came, and they got the Cokes and they got the popcorn, and they all dimmed the lights, sat down, and they pushed play. And within several minutes into the movie, it was like, oh my goodness. Whoa. I thought this was going to be PG-13. It is PG-13. Oh, it's still like big cringe factor. And it was who was more creeped out, the teens or the parents, right? We live in a sexually pervasive culture, and there's really no place to hide. If they turned off the movie and said, let's watch news, they would have ended up watching one of those commercials with the couple in the two bathtubs, right? What is sex? Why is sex? And why do we find this topic so endlessly fascinating? The answer is simply this: you and I are made in the image of God. I want to walk you through Genesis 1 and 2 for a few minutes here. God begins, it says in Genesis 1, it says God created this, God created that, God created the fish, the birds, the sea, all these things. And then it comes to the point where God creates humans and the pronoun changes and it says, God said, let us create man in our image. God goes plural, us in our image. This is one of the most amazing things in all the Bible, and that is that the Trinity makes a cameo appearance in the first chapter of the Bible. Genesis 1:1, it says, and the Spirit hovered over the waters. And the word for hover in Hebrew always refers to a mother bird hovering over a nest. Spirit, dove, my goodness, there's the dove, the Holy Spirit, in the first verse of the Bible. And then God 8 times, it says, God said, and he creates how? By his word. Well, who's his word? Let's just fast forward to Christmas. John 1. In the beginning was the Word. And who's the Word? Jesus is the Word. Think of it. You've got the Father, the Spirit, and the Son there in the very first chapter of the Bible. God is a community. Now, what that means is it's not really accurate to say, like some people sometimes say, that we Christians worship the same God as Muslims and Jewish people. In one sense, it's true. But in a deeper sense, it's not really true because these other monotheistic faiths have a solo God, a God who does not experience love until he creates humans. And you have this uniperson God who creates angels and then creates the earth, and then on the sixth day creates humans, and then God has love. But see, we Christians are the only faith that says that love is before all things, that God eternally has existed as a circle of love. The Father loves the Son loves the Spirit loves the Father. And how did we get here? God says, let's expand our circle. He said, we want to create a creature who can step into the circle with us and love and be loved. And so God created us humans. God created Adam. But now for the first time after creating Adam, we have a problem. It says, God says it is not good. Up until now, God said it's good, it's good, 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 good. This is good, 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 good. And all of a sudden now it's, mayday, mayday. We got an oops here. There's some problem here. But then you look at it and it's not so much a boo-boo as you're not there yet. It says it is not good that the man should be alone. The problem is Adam is a me and not an us. But if you're created in the image of a God who's a community, you got to have not a me, but an us. It's not good that the man should be alone. As a matter of fact, how did the fall happen later? The serpent got Eve all by herself. And John Milton, who wrote Paradise Lost, calls that the fall before the fall, that Eve got separated off, so she was by herself. It reminds me of one of my favorite stories about the guy from up north who was from New York, never been to the South, and he flew into Atlanta. And all of his friends his whole life from the South had said, you got to go to Waffle House if you ever go to Atlanta. So he gets his rental car and he's driving up the connector. And his friends had told him, oh, it doesn't matter. Just take any off ramp. You're going to end up at a Waffle House. Just go like that. So he takes an off ramp. He gets up there and sure enough, there's a Waffle House and he parks his car. He goes inside. He sits down. They give him the menu and he opens it up. and he sees this thing called grits. And he calls the waitress over and he said, "What's a grit?" And the Waffle House waitress said, "Hun, they don't come by themselves. You see, you're like grits. You don't come by yourself. God doesn't come by himself. Solitariness is not good." And so God now wants to find a companion for Adam. And that's why he brings the animals. If you read Genesis, that he brings the animals by Adam as a way of seeing if the animals will be his companion, if they will fill that void of loneliness. And so there's Adam, and here come the animals. And it's like the chipmunk won't do, the orangutan won't do, the giraffe won't do. And poor Adam is sort of like a single buckhead guy who can't find a date, and he spends all day down at the Atlanta Zoo or something. It's like Disney wasn't right. You can't talk to the animals. So the animals don't fill his loneliness. Now, here's the stunner. Neither does God. Here's Adam in a perfect relationship with God. He's not sinned, and he's walking with God in the cool of the day, and he's still lonely. You know, a lot of times we lay a trip on lonely people. We say, well, just trust God. God will meet your needs. No, he won't. God chose not to. God chose to leave a big gap in your soul that can only be met by human companionship. And so the animals don't meet his needs. God doesn't meet his needs. So what's the answer? God says, well, Adam, this is going to take surgery. We're going to put you under. And so Adam goes into a trance, and while he sleeps, God extracts a rib, takes the rib, builds it into a woman, brings her to the man, and Adam takes one look at Eve, and he turns into a giant goosebump. He goes, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. In you I see me. I find myself in you. And to overcome the loneliness of Adam and Eve, God gives them the gift of sexuality. Why? Because God had a dream for the human race that there would be a life union between the man and the woman that would be called marriage. And not only that, but that intimacy and bonding within marriage would be an earthly mirror of his own bonding and intimacy within himself, his Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so what is sex? I'd like to explore three images, three word pictures with you that I think reflect the Christian understanding of what sex is about. The first one is, think of a powder keg. And at the slightest little spark, it just goes kaboom, like that. Kaboom. Why? Well, because along with our longing for love, you and I also have another power in our life, which is our fear of intimacy that also tends to keep us alone. You have parts of yourself you don't want anybody to know about. And so you put up walls. You dig a moat around the castle of your life, and you put up signs that say, keep out, keep out. Think of all the songs in popular music about our fear of intimacy. Neil Diamond had one called Solitary Man, and the Beatles had one called Nowhere Man. Any Rolling Stones song is probably pretty much that. They had one called Painted Black. I don't know if you remember Painted Black. It's like I crawl up inside myself and I won't let anybody close to me. Simon & Garfunkel had a song called I Am a Rock, I Am an Island. And you know, that's true until I fall in love. And then the walls fall down. And all of a sudden, I want that special person in my life. I want to open my heart to have that person come inside of me. You see, sex is literally the urge to merge. It's an explosion that shatters the walls of my fear of being known. So that's number one. It's a powder keg. But then it becomes another image, and this image is it becomes an adhesive glue to unite me to another person. You could look at male and female, you can see that our bodies are for bonding. And so sex is the physical component that is supposed to be a part of a much deeper union that unites two people over a lifetime. Now, I say that realizing that I'm going to mention three competing views of what sex is about that you see in our culture today. I know there are more than that, but let me just mention three of the leading competitors to the Christian understanding of sex. One of them you hear a lot about, especially if you read much in scientific kinds of things, and that is the evolutionary view of sex, that sex is this deep driving force for you to spread your genes, Genes, in order to keep the human race going. And I have to confess that I roll my eyeballs because there's a lot of stuff you read out there, I just think it's just pseudo science of saying everything you do subconsciously is driven by a desire to become sexually dominant and therefore spread your genetic material into the future generations and all the rest. And my response to that is, then why do people give money to the poor? In other words, there are lots of reasons why people do things, and the idea there's this subconscious, mysterious force that makes you want to be top dog sexually that drives everything you do is, I think it's just fundamentalism from evolutionary determinism and all that. But that's one of my hobby horses. But that's one point of view, is the evolutionary view of sex. Another one is, say, the pornographic view of sex, which is like a commodity that gets sold in order to meet my physical gratification. And other people exist in value to me insofar as they meet my physical gratification. That's big today. And then there's another one that you might, is big in Hollywood, you might call the romantic comedy view of sex, that it is part of the exploratory phase of getting to know somebody that precedes the commitment and the loyalty phase. And these are very powerful voices that are out there that compete with a Christian understanding that sex is for a specific purpose within marriage to cement a man and a woman together for a lifetime of loving in a way that reflects the very nature of who God is. In other words, sex is a powerful physical force whose deepest meaning is not physical, but relational, spiritual, and emotional. It's designed as a way of telling another person, I belong to you. So that when you are one with someone physically, but not one with them emotionally, spiritually, financially, and legally, you tear apart two things that belong together, and that is you and your body. This week in rock music, they lost one of their big icons in rock music, and that is Glenn Frey of the Eagles. I am such a big Eagles fan that I literally had people in the church call me up and say they were praying for me over the death of Glenn Frey. And one of my prized possessions is a guitar autographed by all the Eagles. And so they've been sort of the soundtrack for 40 years of my life. They have their sort of anthem showstopper song is a song called Hotel California. And the song really is about how you can really mess your life up if you just go into the excesses of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. One of the lines in the song is, some of you know the song, it says, mirrors on the ceiling, pink champagne on ice, we are all just prisoners here of our own device. In other words, you can go into something you think is going to be fun and it's going to be filled with freedom, and in the end you end up enslaved. You become a prisoner of your own device. And the song, he actually ends by saying, and I was running for the door trying to get back to the place I was before, but he can't get there because it says in Hotel California, you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. And that refers to the fact the Eagles, almost all of them, spent a long time in rehab trying to find their lives and get their lives back. There are consequences when you think you're smarter than God. In fact, in the end, you don't break God's commandments. God's commandments break you if you ignore them. And so sex in the covenant of marriage is a glue that continually strengthens the commitment, and it renews that relationship over the course of one's life as one continually is saying, I belong completely and totally to you. I belong completely and totally to you. But if you take it outside of that covenant, the force works backwards. Instead of making you give yourself and share yourself and fearlessly give yourself, you end up hardening yourself and holding yourself back and protecting yourself. So that sex is not a toy to be played with. It's not a tool of evolution primarily. It is a way of trusting your whole self to another person over the course of a lifetime of loving. Sex is a powder keg. Sex is a bottle of glue. And then the third thing, it is the bridge across which two very different versions of humanity meet together. Male and female, oil and water, dogs and cats, yin and yang. I mean, what was God thinking when he made such different creatures? I mean, the world would have been a lot more simple if God had just created two asexual beings and said, go be buddies. But why did he do this? There's a writer by the name of Carol Gilligan who's a researcher on the way in which men and women process reality in totally different ways. She wrote a book called A Different Voice. In it, she says that people are wired in one of two ways, and it's not exclusively this way, but primarily it breaks along the lines of male and female. And she says it's no wonder that men and women have struggled to understand each other, because she says men are primarily first voice and women are primarily second voice. Let me talk about that. My wife is she's an ethical researcher in medicine over at Emory, and she uses Carol Gilligan to help show people how women and men struggle differently with ethical dilemmas. And I'm going to give you a classic ethical dilemma right now. This is called the Heinz dilemma. We're going to see how men and women deal with it differently. Okay, here's the dilemma. Heinz's wife is desperately ill. There is only one available drug that will save her. It is so expensive that Heinz can't afford it. Here's the question. Should Heinz steal it? Here is the answer of 11-year-old Jake, okay? Here's what 11-year-old Jake says. Says, well, yes, he should steal the drug. For one thing, a human life is worth more than money. And if the druggist only makes $1,000, he's going to still live. But if Heinz doesn't steal the drug, his wife is going to die. So it's kind of like a math problem with people. The druggist can get $1,000 later from rich people with cancer, but Heinz can't get his wife again, so it's easy. Jake says, steal the drug. That's Jake. Here is 11-year-old Amy. Here's what she says. Well, I don't think so. Sounds like a wife, right? I don't think so. I think there might be other ways besides stealing it, like if he could borrow the money or make a loan or something, but he really shouldn't steal the drug, but his wife shouldn't die either. If he stole the drug, he might save his wife, but if he did, he might have to go to jail, and then his wife might get sicker again, and he couldn't get more of the drug. And it might not be good. So they should really talk it out and find some other way to get the money. Amy's brilliant. Isn't that brilliant? I was all Jake. Jake made perfect sense. But you see, we're wired differently. Here's what Gilligan writes. She says, Jake sees a conflict between life and property that can be resolved with logical deduction, while Amy sees a fracture in a human relationship that must be mended with its own thread. So here's what she calls first voice and second voice. First voice, male. Relationships are a hierarchy with the safest, most comfortable position being the one alone at the top, and close, intimate relationships are scary. That's male. That's first voice. Now here's second voice, female. Relationships are a web with the safest position at the center of that web. The most dangerous position is the edge of the web. So for women, it's all about relationships and be at the center of relationships. Now, I'm going to do one more. I'm going to show you what one more difference between men and women. Here's a photograph I'm going to show you now that according to the studies that Gilligan did, numerous women felt uncomfortable with this photograph. It shows an older and younger woman standing in a lab. And women may not feel that way, but they felt that there was tension in this because the women are not looking at each other. And so some women felt that it was a bit uncomfortable photograph. But now I want to show you about men. Here's a photograph. Okay, now get this. This is a photograph in which 21% of men see a violent thing taking place in that picture. Not one woman did. Not one woman in all the studies, but 21% of men see violence in that picture. Now, here I'm going to give you the story that one man saw just from looking at that picture and letting his mind run free. Here's what he comes up with. Nick saw his life pass before his eyes. He could feel the cold penetrating ever deeper into his body. How long it had been since he had fallen through the ice? 30 seconds? A minute? It wouldn't take long for him to succumb to the chilling grip of the mid-February Charles River. What a fool he had been to accept the challenge of his roommate Sam to cross the frozen river. He knew all along that Sam hated him. Hated him for being rich, and especially hated him for being engaged to Mary, Sam's childhood sweetheart. But Nick never realized it until now that Mary also hated him and really loved Sam. Yet there they were, the two of them, calmly sitting on a bench at the river bend, watching Nick drown. They'd probably soon be married, and they'd probably finance it with the insurance policy for which Mary was the beneficiary. Okay, God takes this paranoid, violent first voice person, and he takes this gets along, let's be nice, second voice person, and he says, become one for a lifetime. Open yourself, intertwine your lives, be exclusively committed to each other for a lifetime. And sex is the bridge across which these very different creatures cross in order to meet with each other. I saw an article this past week, and the title was, So You Think You Married the Wrong Person? I think every person who's married has had that cross their mind at some point or another. They say, "What have I done?" And the article goes on to say, yes, you probably did. And everybody did, if what you mean by that, somebody who exasperates you. I was talking to a friend of mine a while back, and he said, last week my wife drove all the way to Sea Island. I mean, the whole way to Sea Island, she drove. All I did was hold the steering wheel. Your spouse can make you crazy, right? They know all the buttons to push. They've got bad moods. They got bad breath. She's a motor mouth and he's quiet, or he's neat as a pin and she's messy, or she loves to come to church and you're right now as a guy sitting there going, when is this guy going to shut up so I can get out of here and go home? And you know what? It's not because you messed up that you're in that relationship. It's not because you had poor planning or because of bad luck. God put you in that relationship. You are with the one he wants you to be with. You see, when you're exasperated with somebody, what you're saying is, why can't you be like me? See, after the fall, we became idolaters and we're worshiping ourselves. And so God says, that's just the person I want in your life. Someone who's going to stretch you, make you selfless. My wife, Becky, loves elaborate dinners and does these big recipes every night, and it's kind of cool. But man, the cleanup takes us until much later than I want to even stay up. If it was just me, I'd just come home and, order pizza and watch TV. Now, if that was just me, I'd probably weigh 60 pounds more or probably be dead. She's a nonstop motor mouth who is just what he needs to draw him out of his shell. Or he is a chronically late husband who is just what she needs to teach her to chill and learn to go with the flow in life once in a while. Did I marry the wrong person? Yeah, probably. But that wrongness is just right in God's eyes. Here's another thought to kind of blow your mind, and that is, just think for a moment that the person you married is a child of God. And we just that just goes right past us. This last week I was just thinking, okay, if my wife Becky is a child of God, that means I'm married to God's daughter. Oh my goodness. That means God's my father-in-law. It's like, I'm a father-in-law. I know what I'm like. A father-in-law is a third party in a marriage who has one agenda: how you treat my daughter. And when my daughters were dating, the boys did not even exist. It was like, they didn't have names. It was like, so how's the dude, And finally, I got married and suddenly they became human. But even today, I got to tell you, today, I'm a one-issue guy. How's my daughter doing? And God, I was just struck me that God is saying to me, how's my daughter doing? Are you pampering her? Are you lavishing unconditional love on her, overlooking any flaw that you might see in her and letting her know that she hung the moon? You got a 24/7, guys, father-in-law who's watching everything you say and do. A while ago, I was once served on a national board with a man whose last name you would recognize as one of the great corporations of America. This guy's not only a bazillionaire, but he's made millionaires out of many, many other people. And he and I ended up getting to know each other because we were working on a project on the board of a college. And so we traveled around the United States, and he told me a story that he's told other people, so I'm not really breaking the confidence by telling the story. But he told me about how a few years earlier, they had trouble in his marriage, and his wife had become severely clinically depressed. And in the therapy she was in, it came out, what emerged was that he was the culprit, that she was just emotionally starved by his inability to show feelings. And if you knew the guy, you'd kind of get it. He's a CPA from an Ivy League institution, super left brain, smart, hard driving, goals and charts and diagrams and objectives and go, 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 and very much a first voice guy. And she's a creative people person and artistic and very much second voice. And it didn't work, and she upped and left him. And my friend's world fell apart. And here's what he did. He said for the next 10 months at 4 o'clock every day, he would leave his corner office. He would drive down the street to a Holiday Inn, and he would hole up in a little room in a Holiday Inn and spend the evening praying for his marriage. And he would journal. And he told me he would sit there with these notebooks, and he'd just sit there and he'd go, I had a feeling. I got a feeling. And he'd write down his feelings. He'd go, oh, there's another feeling. He'd write down his feelings. And for 10 months, he just filled these notebooks with his feelings. And finally, eventually, he begged and begged, and she was willing to meet him in therapy. And so they met in therapy, and there he read her his notebooks and shared his feelings. And I'll never forget him saying to me, he said, Vic, over the course of those months of therapy, God moved my faith from up here to down here, and that healed our marriage. And today, it's almost impossible to talk to this guy for more than 5 minutes without him telling you the story about how God changed him and brought healing and joy into his marriage. And that marriage has been a great blessing to many people, including to me. The greatest sexual joy in marriage is not physical, it is relational and emotional. It is the wonder of being soul to soul with another person without fear. It says Adam and Eve were naked but not ashamed. There's no other place where you're more open, more bare, and more exposed, and more vulnerable. But that vulnerability is what creates intimacy. Sex is saying to somebody else, do you accept me as the way I am? And sex is the answer saying, yes, I do accept you the way you are. And that question and that answer turn into a conversation. And it goes on and on and on for a lifetime.